Okay, it's minivan theology, except we are not in a minivan. We're like in a whole building with four walls. It's so strange. Yeah, I'm I'm actually doing this one from my office because I don't have to be in my minivan today, and it's a lovely day, and so I thought I would just do this one here. Yeah, it's a crazy world that I don't have to be in my minivan for many hours of the day today, but I don't. And so it's so handy because here at a desk, you can actually put like your Bible down, and like I can have my laptop over here, and like here's a pen and here's my glasses. It's also handy and not like sort of like shoved into a seat pocket in front of, the passenger seat or like a cup holder. Not that I'm complaining, because I have a lot of peace and quiet in the minivan that I don't necessarily get inside the house. But here we are. So if you've been following along with us, we you know that we're Minivan Theology random verse number 7 today. And if this is new to you, just go back maybe to the first one way back in the winter and just sort of understand the framework of how we do these things. But otherwise, I'm just going to jump right in. Number 7, our postcard today comes from Lamentations 3:25. So again, that's an Old Testament book. The only thing that I force in this randomness is Old Testament, New Testament. Last week we were in Mark in the New Testament, so today we're over here in the Old Testament in Lamentations. So Lamentations 3:25, what does our postcard say? Let me read it. These are my office glasses. These are not the glasses that you're used to seeing. These are the ones I keep in my office. They've got the little cat guys. Super cool. Or whatever, they're not cool. I know they're not cool. Glasses, readers, not cool. Okay, Lamentations 3:25. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. Okay, that's our verse. So we got this postcard. Who's it from? Who's it to? When was it sent? So who wrote Lamentations? Well, we don't 100% know who wrote it, but the best guesses are possibly Jeremiah. It has, it's right after Jeremiah. It has a lot of the same language and themes as Jeremiah. It's around the same time period as Jeremiah. So there's a lot of reasons that are very compelling, especially when you get into sort of some of the real details of it, which I'm just getting this from my intro to my study Bible. It's not like I went to a special class on Lamentations. But there are some language similarities. There's also some reasons why maybe it was a variety of authors, a compilation of authors. But it was written to the people of Israel as they went off into exile, and it's a set of 5 chapters, and it's a set of 5 poems or 5 songs that were to be said or sung in prayer and services, remembering the work that God did for the people, and the sorrow and the grief they had at the destruction of the temple. So a lot of this is based on a firsthand experience of somebody who was there, probably Jeremiah, when the temple was destroyed. So this is the first temple that was built. This was the temple that Solomon, King David's son Solomon, built, and it was just this beautiful, amazing temple. You can read all about it back in the Old Testament, older in the Old Testament. After there was the tabernacle in the wilderness, God allowed Solomon to build the temple. It had the Holy of Holies, where God, his presence would actually come and dwell, and the priests could go enter into the Holy of Holies and atone for the people's sins once a year. And so there was just this amazing situation where, God's entire design was to be the people's God, and they would be his people. And he made this possible through this whole sacrificial system. But as we've heard time and time again, the ongoing theme in minivan theology is the people, including us, reject God, and they reject his plans, and they don't follow him, and they turn away to idols and pagan gods, or the idols of our culture, whatever it might be. And in this case, what that meant was God, gave them over to what they wanted. They wanted to follow pagan gods. Fine, you can do that. And he allowed them to be captured and sent to Babylon. And so the temple itself was actually destroyed, just like burned to the ground, destroyed, gone. It was gone. And so that's what Lamentations begins with, is this just grief and sorrow over the loss of really the house of God. It was the dwelling place of God. And it was this just huge blow to the already sort of fragile identity of the Israelites, of the Jewish people. They were already sort of in a world of hurt because they could never get their act together. And now they're the sort of iconic building and way that they sort of understood who God was gone. So that's who it's to when they sing these songs. The songs begin with great grief and sorrow, and they work their way through to the last one to some themes of renewal and hope, which we'll talk about. So ours is the third song, so it's right there in the middle. And so when was this written? Well, it was written really directly after the temple was destroyed, which was 587, and subsequently thereafter, but pretty close to the actual destruction of the temple. Remember, in BC time, 587 BC, you count backwards. My brain doesn't do that, so I have to really stop and think. But if it was written if destroyed in 587, it could have been written in 587 down through the 570s and 560s, because you go down, you go backwards, you go towards zero. I can't. This is why I can't drive in other countries on the left side of the I can't do that because my brain doesn't make the switch. So maybe some of you have that skill and you can think in BC dates wonderfully. Great. You can do this too. So Lamentations, who, what, when. The where is what gets really fascinating. So we've got our postcard. We're like, that's cool. Okay, who, what, when, we got it. Let's go visit this place. Let's take a look around and see where our verse falls in this book and what that might mean. It's really cool. So bear with me a little bit on this. It gets a little technical, but it's nothing you're not going to find in your intro of a good study Bible. So like I said, chapter 3 is right in the middle of the 5, right? So you've got 1 and 2, 3, that's our chapter, 4 and 5. Did I say 1 and 2? Yeah. And then our verse is verse 25. So because this was meant to be spoken out loud or sung as a group of people, not necessarily, memorized in the way that we do things now with written words, it was meant to be memorized. And so the writer uses a lot of acrostics, which is, you start with A and then the next sentence or word starts with B and then the next one starts with C. That's in the English alphabet. He's using the Hebrew alphabet here in Lamentations. And so it's so some of the poems actually go in alphabetical order, starting with Aleph in the Hebrew alphabet, and they go all the way through. In the Hebrew alphabet, there are 22 letters. And so when we get to our where, chapter 3 here in the middle, it has this really cool acrostic pattern. And in fact, in the intro, in my study Bible here, it says that it's the most acrostic of the chapters because it exhibits the most faith in God, which we'll talk about in a second. So it's the most acrostic-y of the acrostics. I don't really know how to say that. And what that means is every 3 verses, it switches the Hebrew letter. So there are a total of 66 verses in chapter 3, and if you divide 66 by 3, you get 22. I had to use a calculator. It's not like I can do that in my head either. And so then that means that every 3 verses, you get to the next letter in the alphabet. So by verse 25, which is our verse, the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him, we are up to the letter Tet. It's like what we use for T, for toy. I'm going to show you. This is not in your study Bible intro, but this is my Basics for Biblical Hebrew chart. And right there is what the Tet looks like. It's that little, you can see it. It's the T sound. So if you look at verse 25 in your Bible, it says the Lord is good. That word good, the Hebrew word for good is tav. Think like mazel tov, right? Tav or tov. And then look at verse 26. It is good that one should wait quietly. And then 27, it is good for a man that he, so forth and so on. In Hebrew, each one of those verses starts with the word good. So it starts with the word tav or tov, and it starts with that T. So all of that is to say, chapter 3 is uniquely situated to be in the middle. It builds, and it's the most acrostic-y of the acrostics, and it has to do with God's faithfulness. So we've talked before about, we don't always see this in the English, some of these patterns, but they really come alive when you understand what's underneath it in the Hebrew. And this is written, a lot of this is written right here in your footnotes and in your intro. We should pay attention. It means pay extra attention here. I'm doing something a little different. That's what the writer's saying. Pay attention to some of these cues that I'm giving you. So it's cool that this is where our verse is. It's right here in the middle. And the other thing that I read in my intro to the ESV, the study Bible here, to Lamentations, was right down here under theme. This is normally where I get all the funky genre stuff, like this Bible book looks like a pamphlet, or this is a mosaic, or whatever the words. This time what they said was, the key passage in Lamentations is chapter 3, verses 19 through 24. That's one verse before our verse, where the speaker affirms that belief in God's mercy and faithfulness is the key to a restored relationship with God. This fact is true even for people who have merited and received God's judgment, meaning people who have, gotten what they deserved. Because why? Hope, not despair, is the final word for Lamentations. So that's really important to remember when we think about our verse in a second here. So the where is really cool specifically in Lamentations. We've got a verse here, that just happens in our random verse thing to fall in a pretty cool chapter, where we can see that the position of the actual verse and the actual chapter matters a lot. Our verse comes directly after what commentators will say are the key verses in the entire book. So pretty cool that we've got that. So, all right, great. That's where we are. So now what? Why? What? That's our next step is, why does this matter? What's going on? And also, I'm sure you're out there like, could we please stop talking about the Israelites going into exile? Like every single random or refrigerator verse in some way or another seems to always tie back to the Israelites getting captured and sent off to Babylon, the Israelites in exile in Egypt coming out to the promised land. Well, you know why? Because that's the story. And we've talked about it's one story, and there's one main character and it's God, not us, but it's always a story about the people, God calling to be his own, not getting it, rejecting it, and going into the wrong place, being sent into exile, being, sent off into Egypt and becoming slaves there, and God rescuing. It's always the story of rescue. So yeah, it's like we come back to it a lot because that is the story. It's the story that repeats over and over again. It's this whole Old Testament, everything in here, from like the kings that are constantly terrible and not following God to the judges coming in and, everybody doing evil. It's always a story about return to God, put away your idols, put away the pagan gods, return to God. So on a really large level, that's what's happening during this period of real history in real time, was the people were being sent away because they hadn't returned to God. So much so that the house that God dwelled in, the temple, was razed to the ground and it was gone. So yes, it's repetitive, but boy, it gets into some great how. So here we go with our how. So we're gonna going for a little hike down the Grand Canyon, going for a little hike here in Lamentations. All right. So if the key verses to the book of Lamentations fall directly before our verse, we probably should read them. So I'm going to read verses 19 through 24, and there is a tune that goes with some of these verses that some of you that grew up in church land are going to know, and you're going to want to hum it. I'm not going to do that because every time I watch myself on this video, like singing things, that it's just terrible. So I'll spare you. I'm going to try. It's hard not to. Okay, verse 19. Remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. Okay, so how many of you were singing the steadfast love of the... I'll just stop, but I'm just saying, you were doing it. Those of you in church land, you were singing it. Okay, so the point here is this author is writing with like the dust rising from the burning ashes of the temple behind him. It's like going down. The dust is there. It smells terrible. It's a dark cloud. He's going off to Babylon, marching off into an unknown place, the desert, the sky, going this way, temples behind him this way, and it's a ruin. It's an utter and complete ruin. And the author knows it's because the people have rejected God. God has said, I am your God and you are my people. And they've said, that's nice, but I think we're going to follow this God over here instead. And it never works. It never works. And the author is saying here in verses 19 through 20, the wormwood and the gall, my soul continually remembers it and it's bowed down within me. He's saying, I get it. Like, this is a product of my own broken heart. The ruins that I'm standing in, the smoke rising, is a product of my own broken heart, of the broken world that, the people of Israel lived in. And yet the author in the middle of that is able to turn and say, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord, and steadfast means just like a different kind of love. It's just this love that's all encompassing, and it never ever wavers. It cannot waver. It never ceases. And the mercies, which the people right then and there needed, they never come to an end. Those people, they were like, I mean, they had blown it. The whole country was like, destroyed. It was on fire. It was burnt to the ground. They needed mercy. They had messed up. They had really messed up. They were being sent away from the promised land again. They needed mercy. And the writer says it never comes to an end. And here's the thing. Every single day they would wake up in exile. Every single day they would wake up and not be home. They'd be over there in Babylon, knowing things were, crumbling into the ground. Every morning there was a chance to turn and follow God. He says, your mercies are new every single morning. Great is your faithfulness. So when we get to our verse, the Lord is good to those who wait on them, to the soul who seeks him. Another way of saying that is the Lord is good for those who depend on him. They were finally at their end. They were finally at the point where they realized, yeah, that's what I need to do. I need to put away these idols, whether they were tangible, real ones, or idols of the heart. I need to put away worrying about what other people think and the other cultures around us and depend solely on God. And God says, that's right. And every morning you get the chance to do that. His mercies are new every single morning. So this is a word here in Lamentations that tells the same story that we've been talking about, this whole time about the Israelites going into exile. But it's our story. It's one story. It's the same story. And it's the story that Jesus comes and tells in the New Testament. And you might be standing there today, or sitting, as the case may be, and listening and standing among your own smoldering ruins. Whatever's going on in your life, I don't know. But I've talked to a lot of people today who've got a lot of smoldering rocks around them. Today was just one of those days where it was apparent that this is a broken world and life is hard sometimes. And you might be standing among the broken rocks and the smoke is coming up and it's just a ruin and a wasteland. And you're maybe walking off into exile. It's a new morning. God's mercies are new every single morning. And you can turn back to God right now, right today. You can start over and he is there. He's steadfast and his mercies never come to an end. And our verse says that he is good to those who seek him. He's good to those who wait for him, who depend on them, to hope in him. The hope is not like a wish, like I hope. It's an absolute certainty. It's a reality that is real. And when Jesus comes in the New Testament, he invites us into this same story. The temple, that burned to the ground, that they watched this temple burn to the ground. Jesus comes and he says, you don't have to see the pile of rocks that burnt to the ground. The temple becomes our heart. And he dwells within us. And so if you're standing today and you're feeling, in the rubble pile and the smoke is there and it's a wasteland, whether you've done it or just the world is a broken wasteland and you're feeling the effects of it, Jesus is saying, you don't need to go to a special place. You don't need to do a special thing to encounter and be in the presence of God. Jesus invites us into the story. That is the story. He invites us in out of the ruins, into the promised land, and he dwells in us. That's where the temple is. And that offer is new every single morning. That's what he's saying. It's for those who wait and depend on him. And so that is a word of encouragement. I feel like there's a lot of you out there that need some encouragement today. I need some encouragement today. And so we can know that we can hope and we can depend on Jesus and that he enters into our hearts and dwells with us. And as a result, he invites us into his story, where he's the main character. Thank goodness, not us. All right, that's all from the office, and I will see you next week, probably back in the minivan, back in the New Testament. All right, bye.